So welcome to our first ever YouTube video, and today we're going to be doing a wire changeover on a Lincoln Electric powered MIG machine. Wire changeovers are pretty universal. It doesn't matter if you're team red, blue, yellow, or green. The variations, between the actual wire feeder unit, whether it's internal or external, if it's an overfeeder or underfeeder, the concepts are still the same. You're still going to use the same process of tearing apart the machine and putting the wire on. So that's what we're going to go over today. Really, all you need is the machine plugged in, of course, and then a pair of MIG pliers. So we're going to start at the actual gun assembly of the unit. First, we're going to take off our nozzle. You want to make sure that your nozzles are always cleaned out. They do have wear and tear on them. I'm not a fan of tip dip, although in an educational setting for our purposes we use tip dip just to prolong the life of the nozzle for cost purposes. But in industry, tip dip isn't always a good thing because it does cause porosity in your weld. So you do have to make sure that you're not using an excessive amount if you're using it, but you do need to make sure that these are cleaned out or you're not going to get gas flow to cover your weld. The next thing that we have here is our contact tip. I always like to cut the edge of the wire off so that it's not kinked and there's no little BB on there. And these actually just twist right off. Contact tips do have wear and tear on them, so if there's any give or anything like that, or if you feel that the wire is kind of, jutting out into your weld puddle as you're welding, you might have a worn contact tip, okay? It's very, very common to have to replace these, sometimes in an educational setting, daily, because the kids like to stick their contact tips into their weld puddle, but typically you can get some pretty good life out of this. Next, we have our gas diffuser in the back here, which I am not going to remove for these purposes, but as you can see, there are holes where the gas actually comes out of. You do want to make sure, especially with the flux core process, that you guys are taking even just a wire brush and making sure that these are clean, because they can become clogged, especially if the students are not changing their nozzles and cleaning their nozzles out. You will get porosity in your weld. This one is actually in pretty good shape. As you can see, the wire has a nice clean cut to it. And the machine is plugged in, so I am going to turn the machine on now and show you how we're going to re-spool the wires so that we can do some changeovers. Alright, once your machine is actually turned on, you're going to come to the internal parts of your equipment. Again, depending on the type of machine that you have, it could be an overfeeder or it could be an underfeeder. It just depends on the style of the machine. This one happens to be an overfeeder, meaning that the wire is actually doing this rotation and coming down into the feed system. Some of them will go in a more clockwise rotation. You have to make sure that they are installed properly, otherwise the wires will kink and it will not feed through. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to release the tension, lift up my drive rolls. I'm going to hold on to the wire. If I do not hold on to this wire as I'm re-spooling it, the entire spool is going to become junk. It's going to completely unravel. What?
Turn it off.
That's actually stuck all the way. What you can do is there's holes through the cardboard piece here. You can actually stick it through the holes, give it a nice little turn, and the wire won't unspool. This can be harder with flux core because it is a tubular wire, so it will break off, so you do have to be careful of how much of a pinch that you put on here. MIG wire, obviously not so much. We want to make sure that we take off our locking cap by just squeezing, pulling this off. You'll notice there's a small groove in here. There's also a tension for the wheel itself. We don't typically mess with anything like that. We just want to make sure that this comes off. And the wire wheel comes right off just like that, okay? And you're ready for a complete changeover. You'll notice on this system itself, in the back is a small nipple that this wire wheel actually slides onto. If you look at the cardboard here, you will see a hole. You want to make sure that when you put a new spool of wire on, that actually lines up. Otherwise, it's not going to feed properly. So we're gonna go ahead and just put this back on. And once it's on, you'll see that it actually moves past that groove where you're locking clampers on. Okay. Now, if I were changing this wire into a different size, this Flux core wire is an 045 style wire. If I was changing to MIG wire, which maybe I'm using an 035, I would also have to change my drive rolls. So I have a guide plate here that I would unscrew. One of the important things to know is that these actually come in sizes as well. So if you're using an 035 or 045 style wire, you have to make sure that the plates also match. You need to make sure that your drive rolls also match and your contact tip. So if you're running a 052, you're gonna have to change everything completely out, okay? Including also the liner, which we're gonna do in another video. These drive rolls are also locked into place. All you have to do is turn them and the drive rolls come off. One thing about these drive rolls is they are actually double-sided. So we have an 045, and if I flip it over, I have an 035, okay? There are going to be different rolls that, you know, whether they're knurled or have different grooves and stuff on them. For us, we're just gonna turn this around to the 045 side, because that's the side of the wire or size of the wire that we're using. You wanna make sure that that number is facing outward, okay? So if you have a roll like that is double-sided, the number of the wire that you're using should always be facing out. Make sure that you line it up. Twist the lock. Okay. If you want, I like to leave these off to make sure that my wire actually feeds through. You can put these on, but I've realized with flux core wire, because it's tubular and it has a little bit more bend in it, sometimes it does like to jam inside here, and we call that a bird's nest. Especially if the tension is on and the tension is too tight, the wheels end up slipping and the wire just, it doesn't feed through the liner properly the way that it should be. And then we get quite a mess. So I'm just gonna cut off a piece of wire that I kinked. I'm gonna feed it through. Again, this is an overfeeder. And I know it's probably hard to see in the camera, but I'm gonna feed it right into my liner. I'm gonna unroll it and push it through a couple of inches, just so that my wire spool doesn't unravel, okay? So as you can see here, nothing's unraveled. It's probably fed to about down here for the wire. I'm gonna go ahead and put my guide plate back on. Don't overly tighten one side over the other. Try to do them kind of together so that you don't strip the screws. Make sure that both drive rolls are locked into place. Go ahead and push that down and put your tension on. Now to set your tension, you have to know the type of wire that you're working with. Are you using a solid wire or are you using a tubular wire? A lot of these machines will actually have a guide, so you do have to pay attention to that. Otherwise, you're gonna have wire feed issues, okay? You can now go ahead and turn on your machine, and we're gonna pull the trigger and we're gonna let the wire go through. I like to have the side panel open so that I can see if the wire is not going through, is it going to bird's nest on the inside? I don't wanna waste my wire and I don't wanna waste the whole spool. A lot of machines will have an actual button that does a cold feed. Cold feed meaning that the wire will actually go all the way through and gas will not be used. In this case, I don't have a button like that, so I just made sure that I turned off my cylinder, I turned my machine on, and I pulled the trigger, and as you can see, the wires come out. Now, if you run into a problem like this, where the wires come out too much, instead of wasting the wire and cutting it off, all you have to do is release that tension and rewind your wheel to the desired amount that you need. Put your tension back on. Make sure that you have a new or clean contact tip. Make sure that they're on nice and tight, but not so tight with like a wrench or anything like that that you're not going to be able to get them off. And that nozzle that you just cleaned or replaced. and you're ready to go.